Hello boys and girls, talking about Season 2 today, the healing in Season 2 and how it feels that Season 2 has been over for healers for quite a while now. I don't think you'll find any healer who's going to tell you I enjoyed Season 2, it has been amazing. In fact, you're going to find a lot of people actually either quitting the game if they were healers or trying to switch to another spec or augmentation evoker or whatever it is, just so they don't have to heal the dungeons. So naturally, the question comes, why did this happen and what could have been done differently or better so the season is basically not that much of a failure as it is in the eyes of the healers, and it could have lasted longer because I don't think many people will be pushing keys or enjoying the rest of the season. They'll be just waiting for Season 3. And I don't think we can give a single answer to these questions. In fact, it's a more complex situation, and I think it's a series of decisions that Blizzard made throughout the season, one after another, which led to the current situation. Big part of the problem comes from the fact that their testing is definitely not sufficient. Class balance aside, I'll talk about this a little bit later, but when the dungeons released in the beginning of Season 2, most of them were extremely hard, some of them were basically undoable for medium level players like us. Or especially in bugs, and eventually everything got nerfed, but it took way too long of a time for all of the nerfs to eventually make it to a state where dungeons are not that hard and they're playable even in bugs. I think that's one of the main reasons why people started quitting healing in the beginning of the season, and another reason was also the design of the dungeons themselves. Even after the nerfs, many of the fights and many of the dungeons would require you to rely on other people doing things correctly, using cooldowns, using defensives, and it was not something that you could do alone, which is basically a killer for all of the pucks and the random groups. Now don't get me wrong here, I think that some of the design in the dungeons, some of the fights, they're amazing. They're different, they're interesting, and I'm sure that organized groups had a blast going through those dungeons, but for a regular pug group, which lacks the coordination and the communication between themselves, it makes the fights almost impossible, and trust me, I know, I'm someone who basically pugs all of his keys. So you basically get to a point of the season where you know you can go into a key, you want to heal the key, but you know that you're going to time the key not based on your performance, but based on the performance of your teammates and if they're pressing their defensives and using their cooldowns at the correct times. So this is just basically something that makes you not want to go and do the keys. Because even if you play good, even if you press your buttons at the correct times and you make no mistakes, it could be still the case that you wipe to a boss fight and you break the key simply because somebody else didn't press their defensive at the correct time. Now, as I said, this is a bug killer. I don't know what's the ratio between people doing organized keys and bugs, but I'm one from the second group, right? So I can easily see how people would decide, okay, if I'm to play this game, I'm going to go play DPS because I know when I need to press my defensives then, and if you wipe, you're not going to get blamed because you didn't heal people up, and of course they wouldn't listen if you try to explain, well, I cannot heal through something that you could have avoided by pressing this button. And then, eventually, if you made it through the bad tuning and through the bad design, you ended up in a situation where we got the reworks of the Holy Paladin and the addition of the Augmentation Evoker. That patch created the Exodia comp of the Guardian Druid, Holy Paladin, Tank and Healer, and then you would have 3 DPS, Augmentation Evoker, Shadow Priest and Fire Mage. If you were not one of these 5 classes, the season was basically over for you because you would not get into pugs in a little bit higher keys. The meta was so set in stone and the balance was basically so bad that people wouldn't even care inviting you or talking to you if you are not one of the god classes. I even had people suggesting that there should be a 6th person now in M+ instead of 5 because Augmentation Evoker basically had a guaranteed spot now, which reduced the options for the DPS to actually get into keys. That is, however, a completely different topic, but there was at least a breath of fresh air with the Holy Paladin rework, which made the class really good, really powerful. And at this point of the season, many of the remaining healers actually switched to a Holy Paladin, because that was basically the only good class to heal on in M+, and the rework itself was also really good because it added so much utility, so many new buttons that the Paladin had, that he could actually handle any situation in M+ alone now without having to count on other people's cooldowns. So putting the rest of the balance issues aside, the Paladin actually started to counter the bad design flaws in the dungeons because now it had the tools to handle them. It came at the cost of a little bit added complexity and, of course, The other big minus, the big elephant in the room, was that if you're a healer who didn't play Holy Paladin, then yeah, sorry. Try again next season or something. But that breath of fresh air was actually very short because Blizzard realized what happened with the God comp and they started nerfing everything, including the Holy Paladin. Now this is something that was definitely needed because there were only 5 viable specs in the whole entire game out of the whole 30 something. But from a healer perspective, the only fun thing that we got to do this season in playing the Holy Paladin now also got nerfed. And yeah, maybe a little nerf would have been fine, but the Holy Paladin total nerfs were about 20% since the rework. So basically Blizzard trying to fix the next big balancing issue that they introduced into the game was the final nail in the coffin of the healers this season. The reason for that is that whatever keys you manage to do at whatever level, now they will be harder because everything is nerfed, which means that you basically cannot improve your key score, your either IO rating, and you're basically back into the state of the beginning of the season, which was big struggle for the healers, and there will be just no reason to keep trying to bash your head against the wall, since obviously it's just bad decision after bad decision and bad results that flow into the game. And now that we're here, it begs the question, what's next? Well, unfortunately, the only thing I can think of is just wait for Season 3 because I can definitely not recommend you playing the game at the state right now. This is probably the worst balance that the game has ever seen because there are only 5 viable specs in N+ right now, and even after the nerfs, even if the situation basically remains the same, now the keys are just going to be harder because everybody is nerfed, but the dungeons are still the same. Now, one possible solution would be to at least buff the rest of the healers, which are in-game right now because they feel left out, and they are left out. But unfortunately, I don't think just flat numbers healing increase is going to do the trick, and that goes back to the design because playing my Shaman and my Mistweaver kinda makes me miss the Paladin because I run out of buttons, or I run out of mana or something, and it's just much harder to heal the fights in the already very hard dungeons. So basically buffing everyone else, I think that is just a must do for Season 3. Unfortunately, I think it's a little bit late to do it in Season 2 because there's basically no point to do it for the little time we have left in Season 2. And then the other big thing is to hope that they're going to do much better work with designing the dungeons that we're going to play with in Season 3. As I enjoyed Season 2 from the perspective that I have to heal more and don't care about DPS that much. But having people die to mechanics because they didn't press their buttons, or having a must-have classes in some of the dungeons so that actually they're doable, as in certain scenarios you just couldn't proceed without, let's say, Mass Dispel or Bleed Dispel or Mind Suit or something like that. I think that is one thing that Blizzard just must stop doing into dungeons, making you bring certain classes and certain utilities so you can handle mechanics. As someone who plays Shaman, it is simply unfair. Let's say last season in Alcatraz Academy, we didn't have Poison Dispel for most of the season. This season it feels like really bad in Brackenhide Hollow, for example, because you cannot dispel the diseases there. And the list goes on and on, but if you're bugging, you cannot force people to bring certain classes simply because they do not have the option to do so. They just go with whatever they have available. And then the last thing, of course, is much better testing and much better balance. Now, I don't know how they're going to handle the Augmentation Evoker problem, but let's say that this is not a healer problem. However, the gap between the different healer specs needs to be much less, it needs to be closed down, and also when the dungeons release, they do not need to be extremely overtuned because I have guildies which go into the dungeons for the first week and they don't want to go there again because they see how hard they are. Even if they get nerfed eventually, they simply do not care about it anymore because they quit the game at this point. So yeah, let me know how you feel about this season so far and what would be possible solutions that you would like to see in-game eventually. This is probably the worst season that we have seen so far from a healer's perspective, and unfortunately all the solutions basically make everything worse and worse. But hey, if we are that low and we're at the bottom right now, the only way from here is upwards, isn't it? So at this point I'll just hold my breath and hope that Season 3 is going to be better. It will be better. It will be quite hard to actually make it worse than this one, however I hope it's better enough so people actually come back and start playing the game and enjoy being a healer once more. Thanks for watching and hopefully see you in Azeroth.